Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to the next panel as part of the Indigenous Futures Research Center's Annual Research Symposium. This is a two-part event. We're starting with wampum as pedagogy and followed by ways of knowing and unlearning in First People Studies. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter and moderator for the second part, but also the program director for First People Studies at the School of Community and Public Affairs, Nicolas Renaud. Nicolas, great to have you back.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Right, we'll share this. That work. All right. So I'll try to be quick. I wanted to share the experience of a new course that I got a chance to give last year, which was on wampum belt. So we used advanced topics in First People Studies to be able to teach that course. It was a great experience with a lot of unknown and surprises, so I was happy with how things unfolded, and I wanted to share what I learned about pedagogy and what wampum taught us, because if I had in one line to articulate what the general outcome was that I didn't teach anything about wampum. Wampum taught us all kinds of things to myself and to the class. This is when that wampum belt, likely from 1637, it's believed to be. It would have been an agreement likely between the Wendat and the Tionantati, or the tobacco people, right next to them in Georgian Bay. So the old belts, the old wampum, were of course something we studied, to try to understand them, to understand the culture they come from, to understand how they hold thoughts and memory and speech that can still live in the world today. But the course had a making component. So there was the historical study component, but there was a making practice component. And the two went along, feeding each other. So wampum, for those who don't know, just in a few words, they're made of shell beads. These are quahog clam shell with whelk shell. The white ones are usually whelk shell. Nowadays, it's very hard to find whelk. It's always quahog clam. These were not in the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Valley. The Wendat and the Haudenosaunee would trade with people of the Atlantic East Coast to get those shells and grind them until they get tubular beads. So these are quahog clam beads. So one thing to address was cultural boundaries. For people who are part of a culture that has a wampum tradition, it's still a sacred object. How do you teach that in a course? How do you allow other people to touch the craft, to touch the medium? Do you have to trace a boundary? So briefly, my approach was that I expressed to the class that I was okay with it in the context of a course, that anyone who is non-Indigenous or Indigenous from a culture that did not have a connection to wampum, in the context of the course, it was okay that everyone touches it, but I didn't want to impose it. So then we asked the few people in class among the students who were part of a culture, of a heritage that does have a wampum tradition. In that case, it was 5 Ganangahaga students. So I asked them what they thought. In a way, if they gave permission to other students to touch wampum. So that was the approach, and they were, the conclusion was quick. They said yes, within the context of the course, it is okay. So we all agreed that, of course, it doesn't mean that because you took that class and you maybe wove the traditional technique with shell beads and everything, you can go out after and start making that as your own art practice or sell some pieces or something. It was agreed that it was in the context of learning together in the classroom. And it was very nice to give agency to some of the students who were connected to it, like some of the Haudenosaunee and Gahaga students, and say, you decide, because you shouldn't feel uncomfortable. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable the rest of the term that other students are touching that medium. So that was the approach to that. Maybe there could have been other approaches, but that's how we did it, and that worked well. Interestingly, though, what happened after is that without being asked, all non-Indigenous students define their own boundaries with the medium and with the culture. It's only once projects came back in the last 2 weeks of class that they were presented in class that we found that out. All non-Indigenous students had stayed away from touching authentic original shell beads, quahog clam shell beads. And when I asked a few of them, why you didn't work with shell? First, they were hard to get. I tried to help some students to get the material, but it's easier to work with clay beads, polymer beads, glass beads. Some work with wood beads. Some work with other material. They were not forced to weave something as long as they thought in terms of wampum. But interestingly, all non-Indigenous students brought projects that had no clam shell beads because they said that is too culturally loaded for me to touch that, and they were not prompt to think that, or they were not asked to trace that boundary. They did that on their own. Some students extended that to the hide. I provided the deer hide and moose hide from the craft supply shop in Wendake, so from wild animals. And some students extended it to the hide, saying, I don't have a personal nor cultural connection to the hide, so I'll work with other material for the strips that hold the rows if I weave something. While other non-Indigenous students had a slightly different approach than compared to beads. They said, well, the animal is dead, we should honor everything it offered. I have no problem using hide in my piece. It's not the same cultural, it's not as layered in terms of meaning and historical and cultural depth as wampum beads. So that's how the students themselves helped us understand and define the boundaries, the cultural boundaries of how we approach the topic. Then there's the idea that it taught itself, the subject taught itself. I can't explain that with very clear examples. All I know is that sometimes I prepared very little. At the beginning of the semester, I prepared a lot, like every new course, you think you need to bring a lot. And the more it went on, I realized that, we just had to have an old wampum belt on the screen or to talk about weaving technique or whatever, and things would come. Like it's like, because wampum, encodes speech and memory and thoughts, so they can travel through time. But it's as if it has a mysterious power in which it also generates thoughts and speech. It is a generative medium. So, and it is very condensed form. Very synthetic, condensed visual design with limited material and 2 colors. So it brings our mind in that kind of condensed form to express things that then becomes generative. I would say even for the interpretation of old belts, sometimes I could have spent weeks trying to read everything about a certain wampum belt from the 1600 that we're not sure about the meaning. And after students would present on it, or that we would look at it a bit further, or a student would say, well, I think I see this, or I think this line there kind of relates to this. And I felt like this was not just random. I felt like somehow it was planting in us the right path of thinking to get closer to what it meant, what I was not myself getting to through days of reading and research about it. So, something happened about the objects themselves. Discussions on repatriation were quite interesting as well, because these are things we can talk about theoretically, But when in class we exchange ideas, like myself, I wasn't sure about, wampum belts in museum. Well, at least they're preserved, at least and in class, it became clear at some point that no matter how, in our contemporary days, museums justify that they care for the objects, they're in connection with the communities, they have new protocols to collaborate, this and that. There's no reason that it lives in the glass box there and not in the community. And that became very clear through group discussions about it and how we felt about the object. So there was the idea of having a creative making practice in a non-art class. It's FPST. It's not studio arts. It's not fiber. It's not fine arts. Quite a few students did say at the beginning, hey, I'm not an artist. Why I don't want to make that kind of thing, or I'm not comfortable making that kind of thing. What I learned through that is that, and what they probably learned through it, is that you just got to trust. You just have to plant it and say, and the point was that I put no pressure on what kind of thing people would make. The only pressure was to make something, whatever, just make something. If you don't want to weave something, like draw pictures, just don't write an essay about wampum. Just make something. And bring it down. Wampum in itself, as I said, is a condensed form. So I think it helps. It's like bring down something you want to express to a very synthetic condensed form. And it's not like, expand through the semester, like a short story or a play or a poem. It's like, no, take something that matters to you and boil it down until you can express it in a few pictographs or something like that. And it's quite a teaching moment that everyone has that potential to channel their ideas and feelings into images and objects. And it was amazing everything that people did in the end. So they were encouraged to make objects that would relate to wampum in talking about relationships and their connection to land. Any kind of relationships with, a romantic relationship, relationships with brothers and sisters, with parents, with community, with family, with ancestors, relationships, and connection to the land, because these are two important themes in wampum making, the tradition of wampum. They were encouraged to channel the personal narratives. Most students did. Some made something a bit more, general, relating to the culture and the history, but most students had a personal narrative. Channel something that matters to you in terms of relationship and connection to the land, not a theoretical thing outside. So it is something that starts from inside before it goes out into the object, not just illustrating something that's outside into the object. Channel personal narratives. And that was a rich channel for learning, for thinking further about wampum. How do you, when you have to express it in a very condensed form, how do you process those ideas, those feelings you have in your own life about the land, about other people? So this was very fruitful to encourage personal narrative. In terms of technique, a lot of people are beading, so one thing that was forbidden is to do a beading, a beaded piece, because people do it and they can. So if people were weaving beads, it had to be loom work, like wampum making. It had to be loom work. And then it meant that people made their own loom. Some got the little looms you can buy online where you tighten a little wheel to get your tension with the lines. Some made them with cardboard boxes and wood or whatever, but making your own loom. If you weave something, but again, people were not forced to do so. So what I want to do now briefly with just a few minutes, and then we share the project in class. This is Lawrence Montour from Gartner-Wage showing his piece. I'll get back to it. The sharing in class once all the projects were done is not just part of the academic context of having to present and have a crit. It's part of wampum tradition. These are performative pieces. You have to talk with it. like it would be at a political council. You bring the belt, and there's a story that goes with it. You know, you have to complete it with speech. So Concordia News published a nice piece on it, and then they attached it to an album, a photo album with all the works. So you can see them online. All right, I'll try to, sorry. So this is, sorry, I'm trying to arrange my screen. So this is Chloé Cote, work with small beads on one of these small looms, talking about her connection to her Mohawk identity, being partly removed from it, but on the process to reconnect. Catherine Renaud de Sureau, nice piece. She's a Québécois. She did not want to touch hide nor shell. She did a spin on the false idea in American history that wampum is currency. You know, so she cut up pieces of Canadian money, $5, and used that for the strips. And then use those beads from rosaries that you can find in flea markets, or that it used to, it's probably still the case in some communities. It used to be something in Quebec where you buy those plastic rosaries. If it's blue, it's because you're giving it to a couple who just had a son. If it's pink, it's because they just had a daughter. She wanted to disrupt the gender binary in it. So, you know, clever piece talking about relationship as well. The 3 rows of white, she said, were her partner, and the third entity that the 2 of them as a couple make. Avery didn't want to weave something, but she did draw an interesting salmon design, and it brought her to reflect about the relationship of the Listigouche Mi'kmaq, where she's from, with the salmon. Relationship with the salmon. The man that we see drawing a line in the sand with his axe in Alanis Obamsawin's incident at Restigouche is her great-grandfather. So she put her picture there. At top left, it's her learning how to clean salmon, but also learning it with the Mi'kmaq words. Aidan said, to me, being creative means being playful. What it sends me back to is playing with Lego. You got those purple and white same size pieces, Legos, and that's a map of Kaskapega, where he's from, and talked about his connection to the territory that way. Zeph is gonna present in the next panel, so I'm not gonna talk about the piece, but let's just notice that it's one of the few students who did get to use purple quahog clamshells. What I wanna say, in case Zephyriah doesn't address it, one thing I loved about this piece is that it's one of the few students who thought of it with a direct receiver. Wampum belts were often alliances, they were often agreements, but sometimes myself in my wampum work, sometimes they're not addressed to anyone, they're addressed to the universe or to the ancestors, or they express something within myself. They're not something I exchange with someone for sealing something. But Zephyriah conceived of his piece as a gift that had to go to someone with that person in mind. Sebastian, thinking about his mixed Indigenous and Irish identity, and also had more narrative going with that. There's an echo of the 2-row wampum, you know, the coexistence in the Haudenosaunee Thou. This was a nice, by Sean, who's Mohawk, reproduction of the, I don't know why it's called, it's an old wampum piece that's not a belt. It's a very rare thing. It's in Haudenosaunee culture. It's a confederacy object. Yeah, maybe Amanda knows better, or I don't know better. But he said that it was kind of an instruction, kind of a map of how consoles had to sit and things like that. Circle wampum, yeah. Oh, okay.
Confederacy. Yeah.
Okay,
So
thanks.
this is in conversation with also the Hiawatha Belt. Yeah. I don't know if you guys heard that.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for. And Sean did do a good presentation in class. I just didn't record it all in my brain. Lucina's Inuk said, I'm going to work with material I know. So she said it was seal skin. Someone was telling me, oh no, the hair is too long to be sealed. But Lucina told me it was seal. I'm going to take a word of 2 colors. Still working with the binary designs of wampum. And the V shape represents, I don't know the name of it in Inuktitut, but to carry a baby, you know, the holder, to carry the baby carrier in a woman's back. Lexi did this wonderful piece. Again, she's not Indigenous, so she said, I'm not going to touch shell. She did it with wood. She had just lost her grandmother, and they had a close relationship. And since we talk so much about wampum as memory, and her grandmother was collecting little figures of elephant. She connected memory and elephant and decided to work on that design. It's not easy to come up with, you know, animal designs with very bold beads and things like that. And she did use the deer hide, because one thing she would do with her grandmother, who lived in the Laurentians, was to look at deer sometimes coming at the end of her land, just on the edge of the woods there. Nice little piece by Lena. I didn't know those things. Apparently, it's something kids could play with that she knew in her childhood. I didn't know that. They're like little pegs in plastic, and you have to iron them so they stick together, and you make design. So she did very intricate design, and it's a complex story, complex narrative about her inner journey towards her life that I couldn't summarize and convey right now. So that's a piece by Lawrence Montour. He's Mohawk from Ganawage. He used the clay wampum beads that are often used as a substitute for shell. The craft is amazing, how tight and even it is. There's a lot in it. I couldn't tell all of the story, but it's him and his daughter. As he said, his daughters are different ages and height, but on the wampum belt, they're both the same height because his love for them is equal, and their head is at the level of the heart. What is great is that he was weaving it during the time of the eclipse last year, and was reminded that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was founded apparently during an eclipse in the 12th century. So you have the moon and the sun on each side, and if you fold the belt in the middle, the moon's going to cover the sun. So it's very wonderful, wonderful thought to put into his piece. You know, again, when I said at the beginning, oh, people saying I'm not an artist, I don't know what I'm going to do, and I don't know what they're doing at home. And then the last week, some people bring that and tell us about the eclipse and tell us about the Confederacy mixed with the story of their family. I was blown away, you know, by how much wampum was fostering that. Kara, she's from the Philippines, so I don't know the full story, but she used the dyed mother of pearl shell beads that you can order for a jewelry supply. It's a traditional story in our culture, and so the belt is both representing some designs of episodes of the story, but in the story there's a giant snake, so the belt is also kind of the skin of the snake as well, with the scale in the white and green. Kerry Rice is Mohawk, so he told the story of the 2 brothers in the creation story, in the Haudenosaunee creation stories, the crooked arrow, the straight arrow, and went deeper into the relationship with his own brother and weaved the two, told us about the 2 brothers in the creation story and his relationship with his brothers and the good things and the bad things in it, and totally merged those 2 stories, and that's what this piece represents. This student is Palestinian, Kalim, and he mixed traditional Palestinian embroidery with wampum weaving, and the embroidery the designs are from an old book he has in Arabic. They're all coded, the shapes are all coded, and it tells about his own story of displacement He moved 5 times. He moved 5 times to different countries. He's been displaced 5 times in his life. And last year was in Montreal trying to take courses at Concordia. And there's lots of other meaning in there too. And it was a very, very touching piece. Jesse from Ganawage, his mother took a wampum workshop, so it got them to work together to help him get started. This was Hannah, I think. Sorry, I have to see the name of it. Yeah, Hannah Meehan. So for her, creativity and time for thinking is knitting, you know. So she went that way and told something about her different stages in life as well, personal story. Felicia is part Quechua from Peru, and she's a fine art student in fiber. We took FPST classes. Although Quechua are people from the high Andes, a high mountain, they do use some resources from the sea, and the spiny oyster shell is a material they use. And at certain time of the year, they are toxic, and only shaman can eat them, and then have hallucination and tell stories. So, and it has that beautiful orange color. So she did those woven pieces in fiber that the colors are, you know, matching with the feathers of some bird that is important in our culture, mixed with the color of the shell, and inserted some spiny oyster shell that we managed to order from somewhere, mixed that into our piece. So it was also a very surprising piece. Nice one here by Elise. It doesn't do justice on a picture, but she didn't want to weave something. She didn't feel it. She hung all kinds of objects, including shell, that also tell a story about a relationship with another family, her biological family that was important to her, to her life. And it's all encoded in there. And it looks good against a white background or, you know, an empty background. Edward, interesting piece because we thought about ethics of listening in Wendat and Haudenosaunee culture, and that's connected to wampum belts. Some of the little pieces that are glued in there are the batteries for his mother's hearing aid, because he was talking about the relationship with his mother, and then made kind of a literal pun with this idea of being able to listen. Edna, piece talking about her journey through life as well. Very nice craft. Edna is a Naskapi, and she's very good with craft. And this was Daria, also with the knitting. And that's it. That's the end. Sorry, did I go over time? 1 minute. Not much time left for questions and feedback, unless we take one or. We could take one or two quick questions or feedback if there are, because I'd be interested to know if people, if they have similar experiences, either about teaching or about making or those kinds of things.
And anyone online who has a question, they can put it into the chat. We can read it out.
Hello, Dr. Renaud.
Not doctor, though.
Professor, sorry. Will you be teaching this course again?
Yes. It's hard to bring back the advanced topics back to back in the year, but I pushed a bit to have it come back next year.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
Did you make something too?
Not officially. Not officially during the class. I had just finished work for an exhibition, so I was already kind of done for a while with being bent over the loom and having my neck hurt and everything. But by the end, I made a little bracelet, which I didn't show in class. It was just to keep up the practice. A few students saw it later, but I did not officially come in class and say, oh, here's my piece. And I didn't want to either. I didn't want to take any of the space that was there for the students. work. They were already shown some of my pieces in the class, so I wanted to leave all the space for their work. Thanks for the question.
Any other questions?
Great,
Okay.
thanks a lot, everyone. So
Thank you,
now,
Nicolas.
well, welcome our FPST student panel, Bailey, Lena, Dalia, Zephyriah. If you want to come sit around.
Come on up to the front. We'll get you set up with microphones, and we've got your presentations, I believe, for Lena and Zephyriah, anyhow.
Last. So, Lena, you've no. I think you might be first, but are you connecting a visual presentation? Yes, sir. It was going to be you first, but you know. Do you prefer being second? Just because I added like randomly like that on paper, it doesn't matter. Zephyriah, you send visuals? Okay. And you're fine too, technically. You don't need to connect anything.
What's our order, you think, Nicolas?
The order?
Yeah.
On paper, I added Lena, Dalia, Zephyriah, Bailey. Randomly, no, there's no pattern in this. Is it good? First? Okay. Okay, so I will introduce them first.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. So thank you to IFRC for inviting the First People Studies program to present work by students. So we don't have graduate programs in First People Studies. It's a BA, but we're the only Indigenous Studies program with a major in Quebec, as far as I know. It's a minor in other universities. So we're very happy to bring some of the students who've taken the FPST classes at whatever level in their degree and do interesting work, and we'll share some of their work. So I will do a brief introduction of each. First there at the end, Lena Palacios is a queer, disabled, mixed-race Chicana with Tepehuana and settler ancestry. They play with their cats, muses, when not riding on the run. They are in First People Studies and will begin a master's in Information Studies at McGill in the fall of 25. The ultimate goal is to become a specialist librarian, decolonial archivist, and radical hacktivist. Dalia here is Dalia Beaudry, queer Asian Canadian student in sexuality studies with a minor in First People Studies. They are from Jojage and Treaty 1 territory. They do social work. And for the past 2 years, I've worked alongside mothers recovering from addiction with their young children in a therapy center. Zephyriah Roberts is pursuing a double major in First People Studies and liberal arts with a minor in Chinese Mandarin. He is of mixed Indigenous ancestry from Kahnawake, and his academic focus is on how Indigenous people across Turtle Island contributed to the American Enlightenment period. And to my right here, Bailey Parkinson is double majoring in art history and studio arts. She is Red River Métis and of mixed European ancestry. Being from Saskatchewan, the Plains have influenced much of her creative and research-based work. Our recent studies have brought her focus to Métis narratives and our own family's narratives. Thanks everyone for being here. So if you're okay with it, Lena, we'll start with you talking about counter archives.
Let's do it. I just wanted to thank Nicolas also because he's actually created kind of like, I took his combined film studies and First People Studies class on Indigenous film. And since then, I've become a total film geek. So thank you for that. I've definitely been watching a lot of amazing experimental documentary films by a lot of BIPOC artists across not just Turtle Island, but basically globally, and I've learned quite a lot. So today I only have 10 minutes, right? So I'm not going to do both films. I wanted to talk about the Chilean-Argentinian co-production called The Settlers, or Los Colonos, but I'm actually going to focus and give a lot more attention on the Maori film that's gorgeous called Take, by Victoria Hunt. So, and I'm going to start basically just showing you some of the films that I have been thinking about in order to kind of theorize what I call whiteness as gaze, which comes again, mostly from Black race radical scholars. But I've looked at that and I've incorporated so many different ideas to kind of theorize what these films teach us. And the films are teaching us really how to subvert colonial dominant ways of seeing that are basically what drive the archive, the dominant archive. So these are films that I do believe constitute a counter archive, individually, but very powerfully when they're collectively seen, right? So if any of you are interested, Take was very hard to find, but I have the link. Nicolas found it, and I found the other films, so free accessible. There are ways to find these, but they're not always easy. A lot of them are found at a film festival. So if you miss it, you miss it. Sad on you. But anyway, I wanted to really just say, okay, well, you see me, that's just beautiful, but I kind of wanted to show you some of the theorists that I'm using. I start with whiteness as property because it comes from a critical race theory text by Cheryl Harris. She's a lawyer, Black lawyer, radical lawyer, and she started making this really important point that in the US context, how whiteness as property not only is kind of framed by the law, it actually shapes the law. Right? So this idea that whiteness as property means whiteness is entitlement to land, to native bodies, to Black bodies, but also it constitutes how whiteness is invested with privilege as an identity formation. And I think it's all very powerful to think about how these things end up being how we actually see things that are usually invisibilized or normalized. We start to see these things popping up in film in a very overt way. Like film is pedagogically teaching us, hey, how does whiteness as property actually work? How does it actually function? I'm totally going off script here. My 10-page paper has gone to the wind at this point, okay? So it's gone, screw it, okay. So anyway, I wanted to show you that whiteness as property, combined with, again, Saidiya Hartman, she talks a lot about the afterlives of slavery, so how we understand so many things about land and ownership and whiteness it's still with us, obviously. It's with our afterlives of slavery, which you can actually see. I'm going back on script now because now I'm getting nervous and I'm losing my train of thought. So, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, if you look at whiteness as property, it also shapes our everyday life and its practices, attitudes, and assumptions. So indeed, the afterlives of slavery of race radical Black feminist scholars like Saidiya Hartman and the plantation futures of Catherine McKittrick, still haunt us. While policing in prisons, according to Black abolitionists like Ruthie Will Gilmore, Ronaldo Walcott call it, are the most apparent carceral extensions of the plantation economy. Their effects have been so diffuse as almost to become unremarkable to us. As Walcott argues, one of the most significant ideas to flow from the plantation is a logic of possession, and how it extends all the way from property to various cultural practices and who possesses the power and authority in all manner of social relations in our culture. So inspired by Walcott's discussion, I wanted to build upon his theorization to denaturalize the social relations of looking, of knowing, and mastery over, to shift from a discussion of whiteness as property to whiteness as gaze. And you can see that I draw from a lot of different people, like even like Bell Hooks has this great essay in 1997 where she talks about representing whiteness in the Black imagination. And it's very important because, again, I'm going to weave it into how Indigenous activist scholars and filmmakers are doing their work. So she says, in a white supremacist society, white people can safely imagine that they are invisible to Black people, since the power they have historically asserted and even now collectively assert over Black people accorded them the right to control the Black gaze. Black slaves could be brutally punished for looking, for appearing to observe the whites that they were serving as only a subject can observe or see, right? And we see this when racist, trigger-happy cops murder Black people on the street. A lot of the time it has to do with, oh, well, you know, the cop will say they were looking at me wrong. The gaze is always somehow implicated in these relations of domination. So in conversation with Hooks, Fred Moten will always remind us that objects can and do resist when they talk back, look at, write at, directly meet the gaze of their masters. So while Black people have not historically gathered as ethnographers at anthropology conferences dedicated to studying whiteness, Bell Hooks humorously reminds us, they have, from slavery on, in order to survive in a white supremacist society, have shared with other people in conversation special knowledge of whiteness gleaned from the scrutiny of white people. And then she, you know, I even got inspiration from James Baldwin, Notes from a Native Son, who talks a lot about this. But, you know, moving forward, I would say that what I find really interesting about how they help us, how Black theorists and Indigenous theorists, and I do draw a lot, I try to relate some of these issues of counter-gaze, counter-archive, and I relate it to theorists as, you know, diverse as Audra Simpson, which he talks about the politics of refusal, Glenn Coulthard, when he talks about countering kind of a liberal humanist politics of recognition, and also always Leanne Simpson. So today's presentation that I'm going to really focus on, I'm going to skip over this one. This is part of the Settlers discussion. Very important film, by the way. This is, we can talk about maybe during the Q&A. So I'm going to look at how Victoria Hunt, in particular, oh man, okay. So what I love about some of these films is that they all interweave dominant archive in order to name it, right? You got to name whiteness as property. It's very much a very powerful part of what these films do. So they really actually foreground the violence of the dominant archive. This is like what she incorporates this in her film in a really radical way. And I wanted to put that up for you, just so you can kind of see the juxtaposition. So dominant archive, and then here we have a counter archive. So Victoria Hunt made this amazing 9-minute film. She is an Australian-born queer Indigenous Maori dancer, choreographer, director, photographer, and filmmaker. And she embodies and channels the powerful female ancestress spirit of the ancestral Maori meeting house, which you see here in this photo. And the house, the meeting house, is actually a woman's name called the Hinamihi. Take weaves the mana wahine, which she calls female knowledge, dance, and archival materials as diverse as still photographs, newspaper stories from the dominant archives, which you have already seen a sample of in the previous slide, to retell the story of the dismemberment of removal of the Hinaminhe from Aotearoa New Zealand to Surrey, England in 1892. The then Governor General New Zealand, Lord Onslow, acquired her, Hinamihe, for £50 and carted her back to England as a memento for his very fun time in New Zealand. He basically violently dismembered this spirit. She's a spirit, she's not just a house, and that's really already very much important, right? So she was dissembled so that he could cart her easily, carting her on cargo ships, and then he reassembled her repeatedly on his mansion estate at Caledon Park, where she has stood for 130 years at this point, and she has been used as a boat shed, a garden shed, a tool shed, a storage shed, and ultimate insult, a disco. Okay, so this performance, this film, is really Victoria Hunt's way to create a healing ceremony for Indigenous people, but it's also a political call that's pressuring the British, French, and New Zealand governments to rematriate Hinamihe to her people. So Take tells a story of origins, Maori histories, and genealogies. I only have 1 more minute? Oh my Lord, have mercy. Okay, so that destroyed my presentation, but that's nervousness and it happens. And during Q&A, I can totally get down. But I just want to say that what I think is really powerful about her film is that she's really communicating, again, she takes a very dominant narrative of just real destructive violence, and she's trying, and she focuses a lot on talking back to settler colonials who need to be accountable for the violence they are continuing to do to Maori people. But she's also, I would say, it's more of a ceremony and a way to connect to other Maori and other Indigenous people who are struggling to reconnect through rematriation, not repatriation. So she embodies the house through her performance. This is 9 minutes of real intense stuff. And to start with the ceremony, she invokes the spirit of her father, who was killed in police custody he was incarcerated, and she makes a really important connection between how her people's culture has been ransacked by French and British colonial powers to the over-incarceration of Maori people in white settler society. So what I think I just want to say about this is that, again, instead of like playing into a liberal politics of recognition where she wants the state, she wants the colonial powers just to kind of, again, feel sympathy for the struggle, she's really speaking to her own people, and in her process of her performance, she is waking up the spirit of Hinamihe, who has been basically dead for literally, not dead, but dying, okay, and trapped in a very horrible place in England. So through the 9 minute, which is really a lifetime performance, I should say, the spirit actually does wake up. There's a scene where her body is contorted as a house, and you almost can hear the visceral, it's such a visceral performance, you can almost hear the breathing of the spirit is in line with her own breathing, and her body is not, who is very contorted, ends up becoming relaxed. And then there's this beautiful sigh, like a deep breath that is a release. I'm going to conclude in a minute, okay? Because, again, way over time. And it's gorgeous, right? And so there is the power of the gaze here is really self to self, right? And the fact that she embodies the house embodies her. They're both embodied by a spirit that is trying to reconnect back home after 130 years of being totally disconnected from her people. So what I think is quite amazing about this film is that the gaze is really a love letter to Maori and other Indigenous people about reconnection, but to the colonists, the gaze that is invoked by the ceremony of Victoria Hunt in tandem with Hinamihe, the implication here is that Victoria Hunt mentions that right after her performance, Clarendon Park, Surrey, where actually had a really cataclysmic fire, even though they attributed it to electrical fire. She's making it very clear that it's probably the pissed off spirit of Hinamihe, who she had helped reawaken, ended up turning the gaze back to Clarendon Park. Remember, Hinamihe is right next to Clarendon Park, right? It's on the Lord Onslow's property, and basically burned it to the ground. There's only one room remaining of the mansion. And so it's kind of a powerful way of thinking about the counter gaze can be powerful enough to burn down the archive, but also burn down the mansions supported by slave money that built that archive. So I thought that's a kind of a badass way of thinking about the power of what does it mean to when we look back at power, but we look back in power in a way that is loving to our people, but also is damning to institutions that continue to hold on to such beautiful things like Hinamihe. Hinamihe, the struggle to repatriate Hinamihe is still ongoing, by the way. So that is the sad part, but the good part is that people are fighting back, and the gaze is definitely powerful, especially when it's reconnecting people who have been disconnected for so long. So if you want, just email me if you want to spill tea, if you want to actually hear everything I had to say about this presentation, because I totally went off. But email me, we can spill tea, sip tea, and I can give you links to films if you want to see good movies. Okay, bye. Sorry. I timed it, I tried.
This is from a long essay for a directed study.
2 essays.
That Lena did with a lot of great theoretical references and insights in films and everything. So it's hard to squeeze it in a few minutes.
It's okay.
Dalia, are you okay to go next?
Is it? Oh, yes, it's on. My work isn't as theoretical as Lena's, but I've been in post-secondary education for 5 years now, and I've been lucky enough to work in things that really drive me, such as social work and intervention, as Nicolas named earlier, and sexuality studies, as well as First People studies. And I've had a hard time, I think, connecting everything that I've learned to myself and my identity and what that means in relation to myself. Like, I felt like I knew all these things from school, but there's a disconnect as far as what I know about myself. And I think especially being a third generation Haitian, my grandparents immigrated here in like the late 60s, and my dad is from Winnipeg. There's a disconnect, there's a distance, first of all, from Haiti, so physical, which in turn creates like a distance from myself, and I can't visit Haiti currently. It's not particularly safe. So yeah, thankfully last semester, thanks to Mel, who's sitting right here, I've been able to create some really cool projects where I was able to research myself essentially and research about Voodoo and Creole, which is the language spoken in Haiti. So it's a mix of English, French, and Spanish, so all the colonizer languages, as well as the African languages that were spoken by slaves. And I've framed both of those as important elements of Haitian resistance within my people. Although Voodoo is like a bit more controversial and not as present today, it still was very important. So, backtrack. Within the program, I've learned about creation stories. The first one that I learned, and that struck me the most, was in FPSD 210, so Haudenosaunee people. And I never thought or considered creation stories. Like, I grew up Catholic, so I knew about Genesis and Adam and Eve, but I don't know, it's not really something I reflected on or used as a moral guidance in my life. And then after learning about the Haudenosaunee creation story, I was struggling to figure out what a Haitian creation story would look like. Because my understanding of creation stories were before we inhabited the land, before you and I were able to speak and create communities and be together. This is how the world was established, and this is why we are how we are and how we interact the way we do today. And it took me a concerningly long time to figure this out, but there isn't one, because there was no time where Haitians, Black Haitians, were on the land before it was. They were brought over to a place where they had a 3-year life expectancy because of how harsh slavery was, and taken away from their homes. So I figured out that the Haitian creation story is Haiti's history. And our history has instilled a sense of resistance and continuous refusal within every Haitian individual I know that can still be understood in Haiti's climate today. My grandma once told me that Haiti was in the state that it was, like, not up to date as a form of refusal and as a form of resistance. I would also like to add that France made us pay 150 million francs as a form of reparations, so I do think that that had some impact, but you know, it's a detail. So like crash course on Haitian history, if you're not aware, I'm in no way an expert or a historian. And like, please on your own time, if you can look into this, do. I find that Haitian history is so important. We are the first Black colony in the world, and the Haitian Revolution was the most important and most successful, slave revolution to this day. So 15th and 17th century was Spanish colonization, and then 17th to 18th was French. Everyone was around the island. Following that, revolutions took place. Slaves represented 90% of the population. So they decided that they were going to burn the plantations, which were sugarcane, and also kill the white population. And within this whole history, slaves created Creole, which was a way to communicate with each other, because plantation owners would not put slaves from the same places in Africa or whatever, the same places together, so that they would not be able to communicate with each other. So the language in itself is a form of refusal and resistance of not being able to be dominated and not being able to not communicate with one another. And voodoo was also a very important part as far as organizing revolutions, which I don't have time to get into, but yeah. Haiti was considered the most lucrative colony in the world. Slaves represented, yeah, I said that. I think what I want to be understood from the entirety of our story is that when it comes to language and spiritual practice, even the name Haiti, the island used to be named Saint-Domingue. And once Haitians claimed their freedom, they renamed the island Haiti to honor the Taino, who were the indigenous peoples that lived on the island before the Spanish came and essentially eradicated them all within 50 years. So all of these things are a testament to Haitians' continuous resistance and overall refusal of domination. And I think this refusal does come thanks to the fact that they represented the majority of the population. So when you are able to overpower the population and you're like, wait, we don't need to accept this, you can fight back. And yes, sorry, I got nervous. At one point, I was speaking to my grandmother, who I've mentioned, I think, a few times here. She's like my main connection to Haiti. She lived there and then still goes back even when she's not really supposed to for health and safety reasons. But she was like, if someone doesn't treat you right, she said in Creole, si moun la malmeneo, which is like if they're not treating you right, you have two choices. You can be like, okay, I'm going to accept to be dominated, or you say no and you fight back. And that's what Haitians did, and that's something that can still be felt overall with everyone that I know in my community, whether it's in creating projects back home or just the sense of community that is felt here and learning the language and learning how to write. I know that my grandmother wasn't able to write in Creole when she left, only in French, and this is something that she learned here. There's a continuous sense of connection to the country and a continuous sense of, I think, I won't swear, but kind of like F you to colonizers and to the settler state. So all of this to say, I think having been taught about Indigenous creation stories, I've been able to connect to mine and understand and map out a worldview that I had known about, but I don't think I'd fully conceptualized it and related to myself. And I'm still doing research, not actively, because I am like in school and have a job and, life, but am able to make more of a connection with myself and provide more clarity in my life. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We'll see if we have time to go back to it, but if we don't, I just wanted to mention there's something there in the simple fact when you say to outnumber them. You know, that's at the beginning in North America when Europeans came, they were outnumbered, so they accepted the native treaties, which were about coexistence and mutual sovereignty. You know, the Haudenosaunee said, yeah, we can coexist, don't mess with us, we'll mess with you. But settlers were outnumbered. And then kind of got screwed over time as they became, yeah. And
Yeah, I can give it to you after. Oh,
yeah, I'll give it to you.
okay. Well, it
Okay.
is my name at hotmail.com.
I can share it with you, Nadia. Yeah. All right, Zephyriah.
Hi, everyone. High enough? Okay. Hi, everyone. This is my first time doing this, so yeah. So I was in Professor Renaud's class last year. Are we on? Oh, this?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not good with microphones. So I was in Professor Renaud's class last year, and I ended up participating in making a wampum. And this was actually my first time making wampum, so I sort of put together ideas of what I was doing. So what we see here is my rough draft it's a quick sketch of an idea. So it's concept drawing and a guide. So there's black beads along with the white beads, and together that makes a code. It creates a meaning. So when you're making wampum, there's a storyline, a theme that gives it an overall meaning. And then also, aside from an art form, there's also a lot of logistics to it. You have to follow a step-by-step process. I calculated how many beads in total, and as well as like how many white ones I would need, how many purple I would need. So I had to figure that out before going into the whole project. So from there, okay, from there, so the one on the left here, I have a tray, and I'm sorting the beads. So I'm basically trying to find the ones that pair together well, so I don't have any deviations in height and size, color, but I want to stay away from the word defective because this is organic material, and it. I get the sense of it's character, personality, how things can fit together. So the ones that didn't work out for this project, I've actually kept for another one that I'll be working on later on. Yeah, so it's an organic living process. And then of course on the right side, I had to measure the beads because that's actually really important when you have to make the loom, because the beads have to fit on the loom. If the loom is too large, then the beads fall out really easily. So my loom was a piece of cardboard, and what I did was I ripped up an Amazon box and I took 2 pieces of cardboard, I glued them, and then I duct taped them on each side, so it had to be firm so it wouldn't bend. And then from there, I had to measure the measurements that I got from the beads. I made little notches, and so that's where the leather, the moose hide that Professor Renaud had given the class was going to go. So on the right side, that's where I start cutting the notches with some clippers. And then, of course, the next phase is. It's very similar with the beads, the leather strips on the left. You have to find the same length. You have to measure it, and also some of the leather curls more than others. So that's not very. It doesn't really agree too well on the loom. So I sorted out the leather, and on the right side, I placed the leather. Also, I wanted to keep it all in the same direction. So. On the top, on the very top, and on the bottom of the leather strips, I wanted those to go inward, so I have the finished leather on the outside, and then of course you have to try to make everything even. And then from there, I actually started the weaving process. And the first row, you have to lock it in because that's your anchor row. That's really what's going to fortify the entire process when you're weaving, moving to the right. And then while I was doing this first part, I started getting memories from when I was with my grandmother because I did a lot of bead work with her. I made keychains. She would be working on dream catchers, and it was at the kitchen table, and it was during the summertime that this was happening. And I was around in my early teens, so I wasn't really a football player, but I did practice some bead work with her, and those were some great memories. And then you just really have to pace yourself. And then by the time I got halfway through on the right side here, the overall image is coming together, and I'll explain what that is in a second. But surprisingly, this is actually where I started to have confidence in what I was doing, even though it looked like oh yeah, step by step, he knows what he's doing. Nah. So I got to this point, and I was like, you know what, I might actually be able to do this, which was kind of nice. And can't read my. Yeah, so it's actually a therapeutic process. So I was more nervous at the beginning of the project, and then when I got to this point, you're going through each row, and you're following your pattern. You're placing the proper beads where they go, and as you're doing it, your mind is kind of getting rid of a lot of waste that you build up, living in a social community and stressors and things like that. So it's really emotionally cleansing in a way. That part I really enjoyed a lot. And then of course the final product here. So the storyline of this piece, as Professor Renaud mentioned, it was intended for a gift. She was the program coordinator for liberal arts department, and I had been an independent student probably for about 15 years before I actually spoke with her. And I was working, and I had a horrible shift, and I got really fed up. And I sent her an email, and she actually emailed me back in like 10 minutes, and she sent me her phone number, and she said, call me. So I did, and I went over there, and she helped me out. She got me on the right path. And so what we're actually seeing here is there's two characters on each side of the wampum with a direct line connecting the two. That'll be the purple beads. So the purple beads is what demonstrates the image. So there's two characters that are connected by the beads in the middle, and the two images that are coming up from the center is actually an open book. So what it's supposed to mean is knowledge transferring from one person to another, and it's a promise that I wouldn't quit. So I gave that to her afterwards, and she was very moved. She loved it a lot. She has it with her in her office. And yeah, so also when I was putting it together, when I got to this point, I was so surprised at how much weight there was to it. Now this thing is not very big. It's about the size of like a 3.5 floppy disk back in the 90s. But the weight of the beads was, you would pick it up and it would move, and it was kind of like I was saying hello to something, It was actually a pretty emotional experience, yeah. And then so I gave it away as a gift, and yeah, she was happy, and I'm probably going to make more. Speaking with Professor Renaud, and I have a few other ideas that I'm sketching out. Yeah, I love the experience.
Great. I actually did not know you had documented the whole process. It's nice that you got pictures of the loom and then beginning to. That's great. Great that we got that. Thanks. All right, Bailey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bailey. I am Red River Métis, and I will be talking about Michif, which is the Métis language. The term Michif comes from the Old French pronunciation métif, which means of mixed blood. During the fur trade, French-Canadian voyageurs traveled west through the plains and made ties with Indigenous communities. Initially, many of these relations were for trade, and some of them became familial. So when the voyageurs were called to return east, some chose to stay on the plains, declaring themselves freemen. As these communities developed, so did their languages. Reflecting Métis culture as a whole, Michif is a synthesis of pre-existing languages, that of French, Cree, and Ojibwe. These are actually 3 separate languages. There are Heritage Michif, French Michif, and Northern Michif, and they're not simply dialects, they're unique and distinct from each other. Heritage Michif is what most people think of when they think of Michif, and it's mainly made up of French nouns and Cree verbs, but there are also some unique characteristics that were developed, like, for example, turning French nouns into Cree verbs. For example, the French noun le vieux turned into the Michif verb le vieux uin, which means to age. French Michif is mainly made of Old French, and it's actually considered a dialect of French. And on the other side of this spectrum is Northern Michif, which can be considered a dialect of Cree, and so it's mainly Cree with some Old French influence. And additionally to all of this, Northern Michif was made through contact with French-Canadian missionaries in the Northern Plains, whereas French Michif and Heritage Michif were made through contact with voyageurs in the trade. So already these variations of these languages are not just result of regional proximities, they carry and hold the different stories and different experiences within the entirety of the Métis Nation. And so at the time of settlement, Métis people and their languages spread across the plains, and many of the Métis were multilingual. So these languages were never isolated, and they were continuously developing and evolving, but eventually they also diminished. And so like many Indigenous languages, as colonization expanded, Michif was shamed in schools and restricted by law. Today, Michif is critically endangered. The last census showed only 1,845 people speak Michif in Canada, and only a fraction of that number are actual native speakers. And one of these native speakers is my grandmother. My grandma speaks Michif French, and she's spoken it her entire life. She shared stories with me that she didn't even learn English until she attended school. And so she grew up in a Métis community in Saskatchewan near the Manitoba border. And she tells stories of her young life that are full of fiddle players and jig dancing and special suppers of les boulet puis les bang. Unfortunately, she did not speak Michif with her children, meaning my mom and her siblings never learned the language. Nonetheless, I've reflected on my connection to the language and the fact that I still have one. When I was a kid, I remember I would listen to my grandma talk on the phone in Michif with her sisters, and I knew it was a different language, but I wasn't exactly sure what it was. I knew it was like French, but it wasn't like the French I was learning in school. And I was curious. I was a curious little kid, but I held back because I kind of felt like it was their secret language, you know, just for them and just for their communications. And looking back now, I realize how special that experience was, how I was able to hear Michif within my family. And I'm still so fortunate today that I get to talk to my grandma every day. And even though our phone conversations are not in Michif and her teaching skills are subpar, it's a blessing that I can still talk to her about these things. And her stories are nonetheless such a valuable resource in my reconnection to my Métis identity. My grandmother's life is very much a common story of many Indigenous people of her generation. Although her childhood was one of poverty and struggle, she was one of 13 siblings who always supported each other. Their once large family gatherings have become smaller and smaller, with loss and separation. Her family of 13 is now only 4. And she has fewer opportunities to speak Michif. And I can see that part of her already being lost. Although I will never directly feel the discrimination and shame my grandma experienced growing up Michif, I do feel ashamed and disappointed that I was unable to share her secret language with her. I'd like to think that I'm making up for it now, though. As I learn my family's history, I've realized that I owe it to them. And I owe it to my grandma to declare that I'm Métis and be so proud of it. Knowing their stories of struggle and resilience, I want to do everything I can to maintain our identity. And Michif is a powerful tool in doing this. I hope to one day be able to tell my grandma's story, and I want to one day be able to tell her how much love and appreciation I have for her in her language. To be able to tell her story and the story of my ancestry in Michif would give me her strength and her resilience, and I think she would want that for me. And I truly feel like it's part of my responsibility as a Métis woman. Merci.
Thanks so much. Thank you. So with the little time we have left, I'm a little torn between like wanting to ask you each a specific question to follow up on what you've said, or asking a general question that you can all say something about. So I think I'll keep it open in general. You all touched on something where you have deep personal connections to. It was less explicit for you, Lena, but I know you do have deep personal history connected to these issues and to the many aspects of North American history. So how is it for you that you come to, because many people that come to university, they go to academia, they learn about a field so they can work in that and they grow as people in that, but they don't come to learn about themselves in the same way. So how has it been to kind of pull threads like that from things you encounter in school, in courses? Because academia can also be kind of an anesthesia of like your personal knowledge and expression, but it seems like you're all able to find a path where you grow something somewhere. So in whichever order you want to speak to that.
Would anyone like to start? Yeah, you should do that. Yeah, I think for me, doing social work as well, like constantly being connected with people and seeing people actively get better and get to know themselves more, and then going to school, and I don't know, it just felt like there was a disconnect because I was like, I should be knowing more about myself and all of these. I think also I'm lucky enough to be in a program where there is a pathway to knowing more about yourself. Like it's not the same thing as if I were, I don't know, in architecture and engineering, where it's like you don't really, there's no straying away from that. Whereas, yeah, the programs that I'm in allow connection with myself and allow making, I'm going to say connections again, with what I know of myself and what I know of my family and like my identity. I think that would be my answer.
Go. Can I just stop? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I'll just say this, like, I grew up Chicana with Tepehuana ancestry, very disconnected from the indigenous side of myself. I'm both settler on my mother's side, indigenous on the other. But I had people that basically ran for their lives and ended up in California. They ran from northern Mexico during heightened anti-indigenous violence in northern Mexico and ran to California. I grew up, well, I was born in Canada. My father raised me in Oakland, in an all-black, very working-class community in Oakland, and then in the Mission District in San Francisco, where there were a lot of refugees from U.S. based wars in Latin America, right? So already I was kind of like growing up in a really interesting place where I was learning at a young age how to look, how to see myself, see my community, see my family, always in a collective relationship to other people. And I think what I find fascinating about the films I've been looking at is that these are films that are teaching us how to see each other differently and see ourselves differently, and not always to spend all of our time speaking to the nation state to be recognized as human, right? And all that kind of liberal discourse. But this time, actually, for Black and brown people when I was growing up in the Mission, and for Indigenous and Chicano people to actually be able to look at each other, not replicate the same gaze of white racial domination we've been taught to replicate, right? So these films are showing us a different way of how can we relate to each other, how can we build reconnection with our own broken, lineages, but how can we also remix that culture in a way that doesn't just recycle dominant archive? We all have to traffic in dominant archives, which is so depressing, right? To get to know who we are. We all have to encounter that. All these films I've been looking at by Black and Indigenous people have to encounter the archive of white settler colonialism and chattel slavery. That is an archive that we are still contending with. But again, these films are opening up a space where the gaze back is not replicating the same relations of white settler colonial domination. It isn't about objectifying or dehumanizing others. And it isn't always, again, focused on 100%, let me just talk to the people in power. It's actually, well, you know what, fuck that. I don't have a lot of time for that or energy. So let's actually start talking to each other in a way that I think actually does it in a loving and a caring way. And so I think all of the films I've been looking at do both. Yeah. They do all three things, really. Reconnect within, definitely have a critique of property relations that still dominate our people, but then also start making connections across borders. Yeah. So again, film is pedagogical, it's political, but it's also sees things that sometimes we just don't see in our day-to-day lives. They're so normalized. So it helps to kind of, these filmmakers are doing a great job in shaking up shit, unsettling things. Yeah. So that's why I really wanted to relate also to these stories that you shared, because they're emotional to me. Because again, it's like, wow, it's so powerful when you see Indigenous people actually talking to each other across borders, or reconnecting to their ancestors, but also talking to the Black diaspora, right? For example, in a lot of these films, there's also that connection.
Yeah. So this, I just want to sum up in different words what you said, because I think it's an important
I'm very
takeaway. No, but that's good, because you talked about reversing the gaze and how, and it's, when you have lived the experience of it, like in the case of your family, you've internalized it, there's a dominant gaze that exists, and there's the other one that's more underground. But yeah, what's important to keep in mind when you say reversing the gaze, you don't say reversing power relations. And that's what people don't get. That's where Black Lives Matter connects with Indigenous decolonization. It is not about reversing positions in the same system of power. It is about undoing the structure of power, having a different relationship. And the other thing is something we always struggle with is, is it about calling out the power and the boss, or about building separate worlds, and people like Leon Petasamosaki Simpson have gone through that path at first deconstructing colonialism a lot, and then in her later work saying, I'm done with spending time and energy on deconstructing colonialism. I want to build independent, separate world based on Anishinaabe teaching. Myself, I'm always in between the two. I think it depends also how mixed you are and how you've lived in both worlds, that when the settler psyche is part of your own psyche to some extent, that you have to fight against in the decolonial other part of your brain, that deconstructing colonialism and calling out power remains something necessary. So both are there, but we cannot just spend our time and energy deconstructing colonialism out there. There has to be as much time about building separate worlds. So
it's a conversation with Audre Lorde. You can't use the master's tools to necessarily dismantle the master's house, but sometimes you have to, right? And so the films are literally working on very multiple levels, right? Challenging the dominant archive, creating a counter
exactly,
archive.
both. Yeah, all
and
of
then
it. Challenge, deconstruct, rebuild.
Exactly, but
it's not
also
just one.
spend love. Share love,
Also
share
yeah.
something different that's not just
Not just
about the
resentment.
counter, right?
Yeah.
Let's build something sustainable and affirmative. And I just the Maori film that I wish you all see, and I have the link, very hard to find. I think does a great job because it also connects to a spiritual reconnection.
Yeah, which is
That's
important.
powerful. Yeah. And I love that the implication is that she attributes that spiritual reemergence to literally burning down the master's house. Yeah. And by the way, Canada Park to this day is still not being rebuilt, which is kind of, I don't know, I would say karma, something, or, I won't swear, but yeah. I can say it. Yeah,
Zephyriah, you either following on what we're saying or back to the question of the personal dimensions that have grown out of being in university.
First and foremost, I'm very thankful of the FPST program in general. It's actually it's done an amazing job at helping me connect with my father, who passed away 10 years ago. I never really got to develop an understanding with him, but learning slowly, taking the classes in FPST, it's starting to create a bridge of understanding. That paired with liberal arts, which is really, that program is probably the opposite of FPST in regards to it unravels the Western thought. The Western idea, and so you start with the old books such as the Hebrew Bible, and you continue all the way until modernity. But there's a few texts in there that, like Motangi and Moby Dick, Leaves of Grass, that really pull on Indigenous ideas and understanding with FPST. The cultural root of what they're trying to understand has given me an understanding that I've been working with, and it's overall enjoyable for me. Not in the context of justification for Westernism, but for I guess calming down my own anger and my own grievances with the subject matter, with myself, because my parents separated, of course, after the Oka crisis, and that was a traumatic experience. And so after that event, there was always a cultural identity schism, a shift. But now, over the past couple of years, it's the acceptance of myself is on a good path. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Bailey, maybe the last words, because it's 2:15. So
yes. So yeah, my main field of study, my major, is in art history and studio art, and that in itself has a colonial history. And being faced with the archive, I'm sure we can talk about this a lot. But I was always like drawn to Indigenous material culture, and I'm not surprised by that. But as I was getting deeper into it, I realized that I I skipped myself and I skipped my family. And so, yeah, this is where I am now. Like I got to share my grandma with you guys. And yeah, sorry. But that's it. That's how I've found myself here, and I've found myself looking at my own family because I started so far away from it. And now I realize I've got my gaps to fill before I can go any further.
Yeah, and I was going to say, because you talked about the shame of not being able to speak that would be a whole other conversation, but it's the kind of pride you have now is these are words thrown around, pride and shame and all, but a kind of joy you have now doing this. It does process or erases some of the shame. That's the shame is something we don't talk about enough because people think it's just the one that was put into the 2-3 generations prior who went to residential schools. They were made ashamed of their culture, so then that's how. What we don't talk much about, and I was talking about that with Bailey, is that we have some people of our time, we have some shame of our parents who did not teach us this stuff. Even, we're not ashamed of the culture. We want to connect to it. We're ashamed of our parents who don't speak the language or don't teach us to do a tobacco offering when we hunt or things like that. Stuff we learned from other Indigenous people somewhere else who stayed better connected. Many people have that kind of shame. Not the one of the grandparents who were forced to be ashamed, were made ashamed of who they are, but the one we have about our parents not teaching us, and that's something we'll eventually have to look deeper into. That's all the time we have. Thanks a lot, everyone. You were all great speakers. Thanks.
Glowing kisses.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Those of you joining us online, we're going to take a brief pause for a few minutes, set up for another panel. Joining us on YouTube, we'll be live streaming again then. Okay, see you soon.